A quiet new student tries to keep his past buried, blending into a new school, until a confrontation with a bully forces him to face the secrets he's been hiding, secrets that could destroy everything he's worked for. What happens next will change his life forever. Liam had always been good at blending in. Moving to a new town and a new school was supposed to be just another chapter of his quiet, uneventful existence. The first day at Eastridge High felt no different. The low hum of chatter in the hallways, lockers slamming shut, and the occasional burst of laughter painted a familiar picture. Liam kept his head down, clutching a worn leather notebook to his chest, and slipped through the sea of students like a ghost. He had no intention of making waves. His plan was simple: attend classes, keep to himself, and leave unnoticed. Yet despite his efforts, he couldn't escape the curious stares. His unassuming presence had a magnetism he neither sought nor welcomed. It didn't take long for Sarah to notice him. From her seat by the window in the bustling cafeteria, she observed the newcomer with a mix of curiosity and intrigue. There was something about the way he carried himself, as though he was trying too hard to disappear. It was a contradiction she couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, across the room, Jake Monroe leaned against a table, smirking as his friends laughed at some offhand joke. His eyes narrowed when they landed on Liam. Jake's domain was the unspoken hierarchy of Eastridge High, and he didn't appreciate disruptions, no matter how quiet they were. During the lunch break, Sarah saw her opportunity. She approached Liam as he sat under the shade of a tree, scribbling in his notebook. "Hi," she said, her voice friendly but cautious. He looked up, startled, and muttered a barely audible greeting before returning to his writing. Undeterred, she pressed on. "I'm Sarah. You're new here, right?" Before the conversation could go any further, the sound of laughter interrupted them. Jake and his friends were approaching, their strides confident and their smiles predatory. Well, the new guy," Jake drawled, snatching the notebook from Liam's hands before he could react. "What's so important in here, huh?" "Give it back," Liam said, his voice low but steady. The calm in his tone seemed to amuse Jake even more. He flipped through the pages, pretending to read aloud in a mocking voice while his friends howled with laughter. Sarah stepped forward. "Come on, Jake. Leave him alone." Jake ignored her, his grin widening as he held the notebook out of Liam's reach. "What are you going to do about it?" he challenged. For a brief moment, Liam's eyes flickered with something unidentifiable, something sharp and cold, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stood silently, his hand outstretched, waiting for Jake to grow bored of his game. Disappointed by the lack of reaction, Jake tossed the notebook to the ground and walked away with his friends, still chuckling. Sarah crouched to pick it up, handing it back to Liam. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said, brushing off the dirt. His tone was distant, but there was a hint of gratitude in his expression before he turned and walked away. As Sarah watched him disappear into the crowd, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Liam than met the eye. The next day started quietly, but the tension from the previous encounter lingered like a storm waiting to break. Liam kept his routine, head down, eyes forward, and his notebook clutched tightly. Yet he couldn't ignore the whispers trailing him. Jake's antics had drawn attention, and the rumor mill was already in full swing. It was during the final period of the day that things escalated. The hallways had emptied as students rushed to their next classes. Liam, as always, stayed behind, taking his time. He rounded a corner, only to find Jake and two of his friends leaning against the lockers, their postures casual but their eyes sharp. "Hey, quiet guy," Jake called out, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. Liam hesitated, but kept walking, hoping to avoid the confrontation. "Where do you think you're going?" Jake said, stepping into his path. His friends flanked Liam, cutting off any chance of escape. Jake smirked, relishing the control. "You don't talk much, do you? Guess we'll have to find another way to get to know you." Liam stood still, his expression calm, but his body tense. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice measured. Jake laughed. "Too late for that." He shoved Liam lightly, testing him. "You think you're better than us, huh? Just walking around, ignoring everyone?" Liam stepped back, his jaw tightening. "I'm just trying to be left alone." But Jake wasn't interested in peace. He shoved Liam again, harder this time. "Come on, tough guy, show us what you got." Liam's silence was infuriating and Jake's temper flared. He raised his hand to grab Liam's shoulder, but what happened next caught everyone off guard. With a fluid motion, Liam sidestepped the grab, twisting Jake's arm and forcing him off balance. Jake stumbled, eyes wide with shock. The hallway seemed to freeze for a moment. Jake's friends lunged at Liam, but he moved with precision and speed, deflecting their attacks with calculated ease. He didn't throw a single punch, but his movement spoke of training and control, leaving his opponents humiliated. A group of students had gathered at the end of the hallway, phones out and recording the scene. Whispers and gasps filled the air as they watched Liam handle the situation without breaking a sweat. Jake, red-faced and furious, pushed himself to his feet. "This isn't over," he spat, retreating with his friends as the bell rang, signaling the end of the period. Liam stood alone, breathing deeply to steady himself. He glanced at the small crowd, their phones still pointed at him, and felt a sinking dread. This wasn't what he wanted. He grabbed his notebook from the floor and disappeared down the hall before anyone could say a word. Meanwhile, Sarah, who had caught the end of the confrontation, watched Liam leave with a mix of awe and suspicion. There was no denying it now. Liam wasn't just a quiet, mysterious new student. He was hiding something, and Sarah was determined to find out what. The video of Liam's confrontation spread through East Ridge High like wildfire. By the next morning, it seemed like everyone had seen it. Students whispered in the hallways, exchanging theories about who Liam really was. Some admired his calm yet skillful defense. Others, like Jake, simmered with anger and embarrassment. Sarah couldn't get the scene out of her head. It wasn't just Liam's ability to fend off Jake and his friends that puzzled her. It was the way he did it. His movements were too practiced, too deliberate, as though he had been trained for such moments. Liam was clearly more than he seemed, and Sarah's curiosity refused to let it go. That afternoon, she skipped lunch to visit the school library. The school database didn't offer much, just a dry transfer record noting that Liam had come from a high school in the next state. But Sarah wasn't easily deterred. She spent the rest of the period piecing together what little clues she could find online. A pattern began to emerge. Vague mentions of incidents at his former school, followed by his sudden transfer. The pieces didn't quite fit, but they painted a picture of a student who had left behind more than just another school. Meanwhile, Jake sat fuming at his usual table, surrounded by his loyal followers. The laughter and chatter of his group only deepened his frustration. The video of his humiliation replayed in his mind, mocking him. He clenched his fists, vowing to put Liam in his place. "I don't care who he thinks he is," Jake muttered, slamming his tray down. "He'll wish he never set foot in this school." While Jake plotted his revenge, Liam kept his distance, trying to stay invisible. He spent his breaks in quiet corners, far from the gossiping crowds. But his efforts weren't enough to escape the notice of Mr. Carter, the history teacher. Mr. Carter had seen his share of troubled students over the years. Something about Liam reminded him of others he'd worked with, students who carried burdens too heavy for their age. After class, he stopped Liam as he packed his books. "Liam, can I have a word?" Mr. Carter asked, his tone calm but firm. Liam hesitated but nodded. "I've noticed you've been keeping to yourself," Mr. Carter began, leaning against his desk. "That's not unusual for new students, but it seems like you're carrying more than just the usual nerves. If you ever want to talk, my door is open." Liam nodded again, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said quietly before leaving the room. As the school day ended, Sarah saw Liam walking toward the gates. She wanted to approach him, to ask the questions swirling in her mind, but something held her back. Instead, she watched as he disappeared into the fading daylight, his silhouette a mixture of strength and mystery. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth about Liam. Little did she know, Jake was making plans of his own, setting the stage for an even larger confrontation. Jake's anger simmered beneath the surface, and he was determined to make Liam pay for his humiliation. He'd spent the last few days trying to regain his position, quietly rallying his friends and making plans. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control. And Liam, the quiet outsider, was threatening to disrupt everything. He started small, subtle jabs in the hallways, rumors whispered behind Liam's back. "Did you hear about the new kid? I heard he's some kind of freak," Jake would say, making sure his words were just loud enough for others to overhear. "I heard he's been in trouble before. Probably kicked out of his old school for something shady." By the time the next week rolled around, the rumors were in full swing. Students avoided Liam even more than before, not out of fear of him, but because they didn't want to be associated with the trouble he supposedly brought. They saw the video of the fight, sure, but it wasn't enough to clear his name. Jake had made sure of that. In the meantime, Liam tried to ignore it all. He went about his day as usual, attending classes, staying to himself, and retreating to the small park after school. He had learned a long time ago how to tune out the noise, how to be alone without being lonely. But even he couldn't ignore the shift in the air. The school was a battlefield now, and every step he took seemed to land him in the crosshairs. One afternoon, as he was walking to his next class, Sarah caught up with him. Her expression was tense, eyes flickering nervously. "Liam, you need to know there's a lot of stuff going around about you. I don't know who's spreading it, but it's not true, right?" Liam stopped, his hand gripping the strap of his bag. "I don't care about the rumors." Sarah hesitated. "It's not just that. They're making it sound like you're some kind of troublemaker, and I don't think you are. But the things they're saying—" "Sarah, I don't need your help," he interrupted, his voice low and guarded. "I'm fine." Her gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "You're not fine. I can see it." Liam pulled away quickly, his heart pounding. Just don't get involved. It's not worth it." He walked away without another word, leaving Sarah standing in the hallway, confusion and concern clouding her thoughts. Back in the locker room after gym class, Jake stood by the door with a smug grin plastered on his face. He could tell that Liam's defenses were starting to crack, but he wasn't finished yet. He had a bigger plan in mind, one that would destroy whatever fragile piece Liam had left. As Liam gathered his things, trying to ignore the whispers from the other students, Jake stepped into his path again, blocking the exit. "Got a minute, tough guy?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Liam didn't even glance at him. "I'm not interested." Jake wasn't going to let it go that easily. "I think you are. You see, everyone's been talking about you, about your little video. Funny thing is, I'm pretty sure you don't want the whole school to see it, do you?" Liam froze. His heart raced as he realized exactly what Jake meant. "Unless, of course, you'd rather stay quiet and let things blow over. But hey, if you want, I can make sure your secret gets out. It's all up to you," Jake said, his grin widening. Liam clenched his fists at his sides. He couldn't let Jake control him, couldn't let him win. But the pressure was unbearable, the walls closing in with every passing moment. The battle was far from over, and Liam had no idea what Jake would throw at him next. Liam couldn't escape the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. The pressure was mounting from every direction. Jake's relentless taunts, the rumors spreading like wildfire, and the ever-present feeling of eyes watching him. It wasn't just the school that felt like a battleground. It was his entire existence, constantly shifting, never allowing him to find peace. He had managed to keep his past buried for so long, but now it was threatening to surface, and Liam knew that if it did, there would be no going back. The truth would hurt more than any physical fight ever could. He could already hear the whispers in the hallways, the mocking laughter, the judgment. He wasn't sure if he could handle it again. But it wasn't just Jake who was curious about his history. Sarah, too, had been doing her own digging. She had spent hours after school searching for anything that could explain the enigma that was Liam. She'd found the rumors, the ones Jake had started. And while most of it seemed exaggerated, there were kernels of truth buried deep within. The breakthrough came one evening when she stumbled upon a local news article from several years ago. It was an old piece, faded with time, but its contents hit her hard. The headline read, "Teen arrested in connection with local gang activity." The article mentioned a young man named Liam the Ghost Riley, who had been part of a notorious youth gang before he mysteriously disappeared from the scene. There were no further details, no follow-up stories, just the unanswered question of what had happened to him. Sarah's heart sank as she read the words. It all made sense now. The mystery of Liam's silence, his reluctance to engage, the sense of danger that seemed to follow him. Liam hadn't just moved schools. He had disappeared from his past, and now it seemed his past was catching up with him. The next day, Sarah decided it was time to confront him. But as she approached his usual spot by the tree outside, she hesitated. The weight of her newfound knowledge felt like a burden she wasn't sure how to bear. Could she confront him about something so personal, something so painful? But as Liam sat there scribbling in his notebook, she couldn't shake the feeling that he needed someone to know the truth, even if he wasn't ready to share it. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked over and sat beside him. He didn't look up, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders, the guarded air that surrounded him. "Liam," she started, her voice tentative. "I found something." He finally looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" She took a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I found out about your past, about what happened before you came here." Liam's expression darkened. He closed his notebook slowly, his fingers gripping the edges tightly. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I didn't mean to invade your privacy," Sarah said quickly. "But I need to understand. You don't have to tell me everything, but I don't want to see you go through this alone." Liam stood abruptly, his movements stiff. "You don't understand. It's better if you don't know." Sarah stood too, catching his arm before he could walk away. "Liam, I'm not trying to make things worse. I just want to help." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, with a quiet sigh, he said, "I used to be part of a gang. I wasn't proud of it. I made mistakes, big ones. I left that life behind when I came here, but sometimes it feels like it's following me, and it's going to destroy everything I've tried to build." His voice was raw, and for the first time since she met him, Sarah saw the weight of his burden. Liam wasn't just running from his past. He was terrified of it catching up with him, and the fear was eating him alive. "Liam, you don't have to face this alone," Sarah said, her voice steady and full of empathy. "Whatever happens, I'm here." For a fleeting moment, Liam seemed to soften. His eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of gratitude mixed with uncertainty. "Thank you," he whispered before turning and walking away, his figure swallowed by the crowd. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with the knowledge of the struggle he was facing. But in that moment, she also knew that she couldn't walk away, not now. There were too many pieces to this puzzle, and Sarah was determined to help Liam put them together, no matter the cost. The days following Liam's confession were heavy with an unspoken understanding between him and Sarah. Though they hadn't talked much since that conversation, there was a quiet shift in the air. Sarah noticed that Liam seemed more distant, like he was waiting for something. And she couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there, watching, plotting. It didn't take long for Sarah's suspicions to be confirmed. The tension in the school had only grown thicker. Jake's eyes were everywhere, always watching Liam, his eyes gleaming with a new determination. Sarah overheard one of his conversations in the hallway, his voice low and cold. "We're going to make him pay," Jake was saying to his friends. "I've got everything set up. This time, he won't get away." Jake was planning something, and Sarah could feel it in her gut. But what exactly was he planning? And how could she warn Liam before it was too late? The next day, the trap snapped shut. It began in the most subtle way. A few more rumors about Liam, whispers in the corners of the school that painted him as a violent, dangerous figure. The story about his past, about his involvement with the gang, spread like wildfire. Students eyed him warily as he passed by, and even Sarah could feel the change in the atmosphere around him. It was as though the walls were closing in on him. Every smile was a mockery, every glance a judgment. But that wasn't the worst of it. By lunchtime, the situation was set into motion. Jake had orchestrated it all, using the fight video as a weapon, playing on everyone's fears and prejudices. He had gathered a crowd in the gymnasium, making it look like a casual gathering. Sarah, sensing something was off, tried to approach Liam, but it was too late. Liam walked into the gym with his head down, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. He didn't realize yet that he had just stepped into Jake's carefully constructed trap. The atmosphere was charged with tension as the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Jake emerged from the back of the gym, standing in the center of the crowd. With a wicked grin, he called out to Liam, "Hey, new guy, you got something to prove, right?" His voice echoed across the gym, drawing everyone's attention. Liam paused, looking around at the sea of faces. His stomach tightened, but he remained silent, waiting. Jake raised his phone, the video of their earlier confrontation appearing on the screen. "I think it's time the whole school sees what you're really about." The room fell silent, all eyes locked on Liam as the video played. The familiar footage of Liam fending off Jake and his friends flashed on the screen. Only now it was edited to make Liam look more aggressive, more dangerous. A few students in the back began to murmur, their whispers growing louder. Liam's heart raced. The anger from the fight, the feelings of betrayal, all came rushing back. But there was something else too, a deep, suffocating fear that this moment would define him forever. He couldn't let Jake win. He couldn't let the lies shape who he was. Sarah stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "That's not the full story," she said, her tone firm. "You're not showing what really happened. You're not showing how he tried to avoid all of this." Jake's smirk faltered for a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Oh, it's the full story, all right," he sneered. "We all know who Liam really is. The question is, do you?" The crowd began to stir, some students looking at Sarah, some at Liam. The moment was suspended, fragile, on the edge of collapse. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Liam. She saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the uncertainty that had crept back into his gaze. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him to stand tall, but the pressure was suffocating. For a brief second, Liam closed his eyes. Then he opened them, and the look in his eyes was different. There was no more fear, no more hesitation. He stepped forward, his voice steady and clear as he addressed the room. "You want to know who I am?" Liam said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm trying to be someone different. I'm trying to move forward. But you, Jake, you can't keep pushing me back into my past. I'm not who you think I am." For the first time, there was a flicker of doubt in Jake's eyes. But he quickly masked it with a snarl, his hands tightening around his phone. "We'll see about that." As the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of uncertainty filled the gym. The trap had been set, but Liam's words had planted a seed of doubt. Sarah stood silently at the back of the gym, watching Liam walk away with his head held high. It wasn't over yet, but maybe, just maybe, the tide was starting to turn. The next few days at East Ridge High were filled with tension. Jake's manipulation had backfired, but that didn't mean the danger was over. If anything, it had only intensified. Students were still talking, still whispering behind Liam's back. Sarah could see the glances that followed him, the way people watched him, some with judgment, others with fear. And Jake wasn't about to let things slide. But something had changed. The energy in the school had shifted. Liam's response in the gym had made an impact. His words, though quiet, carried a power that silenced the room. He had shown them who he really was, not the violent figure Jake had tried to paint, but a person determined to leave his past behind. Liam hadn't just defended himself physically, he had stood his ground in a way Jake never expected. By the end of the week, the confrontation that Sarah had been dreading was unavoidable. It was after school, and the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Liam was sitting on a bench, his notebook open in front of him, but his focus seemed far away. Sarah approached him cautiously, her footsteps quiet on the pavement. "Liam," she said softly, drawing his attention. He looked up, and for the first time in days, there was a hint of exhaustion in his eyes. "Hey, you okay?" Sarah asked, sitting beside him. Liam nodded but didn't speak for a moment. "It's been a lot, but I'll get through it." Sarah studied him, her eyes scanning his face. There was a calmness there now, a resolve that hadn't been there before. She knew he was struggling, but he was stronger than he realized. "You know, Jake isn't going to stop. He'll keep pushing." "I know," Liam replied, his voice low. "But I'm done running from him." Before Sarah could respond, a voice called out from across the courtyard. Well, if it isn't the new guy. Ready for round two?" Liam turned, his body tensing. Jake stood at the entrance of the courtyard, flanked by his usual entourage. He was grinning, but there was a dangerous edge to it. This wasn't a joke. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. "I've had enough of your games, Jake," Liam said, standing up slowly. His hands clenched at his sides, but his posture was steady. "I'm not backing down anymore." Jake laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You really think you can win this? You're just a kid, Liam. You think you can walk in here and act like you belong?" "I do belong," Liam replied, his voice unwavering. "And you can't scare me anymore." Sarah stood off to the side, her heart racing. She knew Liam wasn't the same person he had been before, but there was still a sense of danger in the air. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about proving who he was, to himself and to everyone around him. Jake stepped forward, a glint of malice in his eyes. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're making a mistake. You think I won't tear you down? You think you've got what it takes to take me on?" Liam didn't flinch. "I don't need to take you on, Jake. I just need you to understand something. I'm not the person you think I am, and I'm not the person I used to be either." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The crowd of students who had gathered in the background waited in tense silence, watching the confrontation unfold. Jake's eyes narrowed, his grin faltering for the briefest of moments. "You don't get to walk away from this, Liam," Jake sneered, his voice low and venomous. "Not this time." Liam took a step forward, meeting Jake's glare head-on. "I'm not walking away from anything, Jake. I'm standing right here." And then, just as quickly as it had started, Jake's bravado cracked. He hesitated, his expression faltering. His friends exchanged uncertain glances, clearly not expecting Liam to stand his ground so firmly. Without a word, Jake turned, his face twisted in frustration. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath as he stalked off, his friends trailing behind him, their eyes lingering on Liam with a mix of disbelief and reluctant respect. Liam didn't move for a moment, his body still tense. But as Jake and his friends disappeared from view, he let out a long breath. His heart was pounding, but something had shifted in him. He had faced the worst of it, not with anger, but with control. He hadn't fought back with fists. He had fought back with his own truth. Sarah stepped closer, her expression a mixture of relief and pride. "You did it," she said softly. Liam looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I did, didn't I?" The weight that had been pressing down on him for so long seemed to lift, just a little. He had stood up to his past, to Jake, and to everyone who had ever underestimated him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the future he was determined to build. And for the first time in a long time, Liam felt like maybe, just maybe, he could be free of the ghosts that had haunted him. The days following the confrontation with Jake were filled with a mix of relief and quiet reflection. The tension in the school had shifted once again. Jake had been suspended for his actions, a consequence that sent ripples through East Ridge High. Some students were angry, others relieved. But Liam's standing in the school had changed. His victory over Jake had earned him a hesitant respect, but it also made him a target of suspicion for some. The whispers in the hallways had quieted, but the lingering glances told a different story. Some students saw him as a threat, a dangerous figure who had somehow managed to bring down the school's unofficial king. Others, though, saw him in a new light, a survivor, someone who had been through the worst and come out the other side. Liam wasn't sure how to feel about it. Part of him wanted to disappear again, to return to his quiet existence where no one asked questions. But the other part, the part that had fought to leave his past behind, knew that he couldn't go back to that life. Not now. He walked through the halls, his eyes lowered, doing his best to stay invisible. But the weight of the stairs wasn't as oppressive as it had been before. He had made his stand, and now people seemed to view him with a mix of caution and curiosity. At lunch, Sarah joined him under the tree again. This time she sat beside him without hesitation. They didn't say much at first, both of them content to sit in the quiet that had become a familiar comfort. It felt like a moment of peace after everything that had happened.
"You okay?" Sarah asked after a while, her voice gentle. Liam nodded. "Yeah, just trying to figure things out, I guess." "You don't have to figure it all out right now," Sarah said with a small smile. "You've already come a long way." Liam glanced at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel something other than uncertainty. There was a connection there, something that had started to form in the quiet moments they had shared. He hadn't realized how much he needed someone to just be there. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the breeze. Sarah smiled warmly, her eyes meeting his. "You don't have to do anything alone, Liam. You've got people who care about you." For a moment there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a peaceful quiet, a shared understanding. Liam realized that he had come to rely on Sarah more than he had expected. She had become his anchor, someone who had seen him at his lowest and still chose to stand by him. But even as the moment stretched on, Liam couldn't ignore the lingering doubts that gnawed at him. The school was still a place of judgment, and he knew that despite the temporary calm, things could turn again. He could feel the weight of his past hovering just out of sight, threatening to resurface. "I don't know if things are going to stay like this," Liam said, his voice tinged with a quiet worry. Sarah turned to him, her expression serious but supportive. "You don't have to worry about that. We'll figure it out together. Whatever happens, I'm here." Liam let out a breath, feeling a small measure of peace settle in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he could move forward.
The past didn't have to define him. He was more than the mistakes he had made, more than the person he used to be. He was someone who was learning to trust again, to rebuild, to find his place. But as he looked toward the future, Liam knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but now he wasn't alone. And for the first time, he could see the possibility of a new beginning. The weeks that followed were quieter, but they were also filled with a new sense of purpose. Liam had found his rhythm at East Ridge High, a delicate balance between moving forward and facing his past. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments where the whispers and glances made him feel like an outsider again. But he had learned to let those moments slide off him. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first walked through those school doors. Sarah had been there every step of the way, offering him the support he never realized he needed. They spent their afternoons together, studying or simply talking about life, and it was during one of these moments that the idea came to him. He had something to offer, something that could make a real difference. "Maybe I can help," Liam said one afternoon, his voice tinged with a quiet determination. Sarah looked up from her book, surprised. "Help how?" Liam hesitated, thinking for a moment. "There are other students here, kids who feel like I did, like they don't belong, like their past defines them. Maybe I could start a group, a place where they don't have to hide who they are." Sarah's eyes softened. "That sounds like a great idea. You've been through so much already. You can help others see that they can get through it too." With Sarah's encouragement, Liam set the wheels in motion. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the first step toward a new future, one where he could use his past to help others build their own new beginnings. And for the first time, he felt truly hopeful about the future. As Liam stood in front of the classroom, addressing the small group of students who had gathered for the support group he'd started, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The room was filled with students from different walks of life, all of them carrying their own burdens, their own struggles. But here in this space, they were united by a common understanding. They weren't alone. Liam spoke with a quiet confidence, sharing his own story, the mistakes he had made, and the journey that had brought him to this moment. It wasn't easy opening up to others, but he knew it was the right thing to do. If he could help even one person see that they weren't defined by their past, that they could choose who they wanted to be, it would all be worth it. But just as things seemed to be settling into a new rhythm, the past had a way of creeping back into his life. One afternoon, as Liam was leaving school, he spotted a familiar face in the distance, a face he had hoped never to see again. It was a man he hadn't seen in years, someone from his old life. His heart skipped a beat as the figure drew closer, his presence an unwelcome reminder of everything Liam had tried to leave behind. The man's eyes locked onto Liam's, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Liam felt a rush of emotions, fear, anger, and shame, but most of all, he felt the weight of his past pressing down on him once again. "Liam," the man called, his voice cold. "You think you've escaped, but you haven't. Not yet." And just like that, the echoes of Liam's past had returned. In the end, Liam learns that facing his past isn't just about defeating those who try to bring him down. It's about confronting the parts of himself he's been running from. Sometimes the greatest battle is the one we fight inside, and only by embracing who we are, flaws and all, can we move forward. It's a reminder that we all have the power to change, no matter how dark our past may seem. But the question remains, how would you have handled the challenges Liam faced? Would you have stepped into the unknown or hidden from it? Click the video on the screen now to continue your journey of self-discovery and learn how you can apply these lessons to your own life. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge you to think and grow. Your next step is just a click away.